Hello and welcome back to my channel, Cozy Gamer Jessa. And if you didn't already see the last video, we went on a 7-hour nightmare villager hunt. I used 194 tickets, which is a lot. I did get them all from Treasure Islands, and we were looking for Grizzly. Right now, we are saying goodbye to Cherry because she decided she wanted to move off the island, which is totally okay because we have a dreamy list and we were looking for someone else anyways. So this is sort of like a recap of the 7-hour video if you didn't want to watch 7 hours, which totally understandable. I can see why. But I'm going to go over all of the villagers that I met on my treasure islands. So I'm warning you now, I did organize them by animal, not alphabetical. I did want to do alphabetical, but there was so much footage to go through, I think my brain would have exploded. But they are by animal, and if there's duplicates, there is a lot of duplicates. I do have those set aside too. I'll show you when I come to one. But this is our first one, Chow. We're going through all the bears that we went through, and Grizzly is a bear that we were looking for, so we did have a couple opportunities to see him, and it didn't happen. And then we got Beardo twice, 2 different occasions. And the next one we got is Groucho, which he was tempting, but I didn't really like the style. And then we have Carlisle. So next we have the rhinos. We have Meringue, adorable. And then we have Eliza, also very adorable, which doesn't really fit the theme, but she was also tempting. We have Tank, which speaks for himself. We wouldn't take Tank. And then we have Spike. Very interesting character design. And now we have the wolves. We have Sky. The wolves were also very tempting because I don't have any wolves on my island right now. We saw Fang. And then we also saw Lobo. I think that's how you say it. So we left all those wolves behind, and now we're on the cubs. The first one is June. Very cute. Next, we have Stitches, which is a dreamy for a lot of people, but we did leave him behind, unfortunately. Okay, moving on, we have Poncho, and we have the beautiful Olive, which was very tempting, but she was not on the list, so I decided against her. Next, we have the bunnies. We have Tiffany, and then we saw Claude twice. I think I pronounced his name right. Next, we have Bon Bon. Very cute. She was also very tempting because we don't have a bunny yet. This is Ruby. And moving on, we have Gabby, which concludes the last of the bunnies. All right, moving on to the long list of birds, we have Luca. And then we saw Twiggy twice. Very interesting. Moving on again, we have Robin. And the next bird we have is Jitters. And this is Peck. We have Jay. Next we have Admiral, which I don't even think I've seen him before. And we have Sparrow, which honestly is a pretty cute bird. Same with Piper. And if you're wondering, we saw 10 birds, with 1 duplicate, of course. Moving on, we have the Anteaters. You just saw Antonio. We have Annalisa. And now we have this guy. I can't pronounce his name, and that's okay. All right, moving on, we have the Bulls. We have Angus, twice, of course. Next, we have Vic, which is very interesting. Then we saw Coach twice. Next, we saw Rodeo twice, and Rodeo was on my last island. Love him. Then we have Stu twice again. Last but not least, we have T-Bone. I love T-Bone. He's cute. And we have the squirrels. We saw Sheldon twice. Next, we saw Peanut. Adorable. Our next squirrel we saw was Agent S, and I didn't know he existed. Next we have Mint, and I was so tempted with her, but I know she does not match our island. We are on to the monkeys. We have Nana. Next we have Elise. The next monkey we have is Tammy. And we have Deli. Very cute. We saw Simon twice. Alright, so we have this monkey. I cannot pronounce his name, so I won't. And last but not least, we have Monty. Now we are moving on to the tigers, I think, or cheetahs. So we saw Bianca 4 times. Fantastic. We got to see Bangle. And then we saw Leonardo 4 times, of course. Then we have Claudia. Moving on, we have Tybalt. And we are on to the frogs. We saw Drift. Very cute. I honestly love the frogs. The next frog we saw was Croc. And we have Camo Frog. And then we saw Gemet twice. Next we saw Puddles. And then we have Huck. And that was our last frog. Moving on to the penguins, we saw Flo. And then we saw Tex. And then we saw Cadwick. Moving on to the octopus, we saw Octavian 3 times. We saw Cephalobot once. Probably butchered that. And then we saw Marina twice. And that was all of the octopuses. Now we have the other birds. So first we saw Sandy. Then we saw Queenie twice. I'm not sure if these are peacocks. Anyways, we saw Phil 1 time, of course. And then we saw Sprocket. That was the last of the weird birds. Now we are on the sheep. We saw Carlos first. And then we saw Vesta. Very cute. And then my favorite, Willow. Cutie patootie. She was on my last island. And then we saw Timbra, which also pretty cute. Moving on to the elephants, we saw Dizzy. And then we saw Margie. Next, we have Axel. And then we saw Eloise. Very cute. And we have Paulo. Love his eyebrows. And Ellie, who is adorable. She was very tempting, but I didn't think an elephant matched cottagecore. We have the pigs. We have Rasher. Next, we have Panchetti, I think. And we saw Maggie twice. And we also saw Hugh twice. And that was the last of the pigs. Moving on to the eagles, we saw Pierce 1 time. And then we also saw Keaton 1 time. And then we saw Celia, very cute, and Frank. Alright, and our last eagle is Avery. Now we have a couple cows. We have Naomi. And then we have Tipper, who is actually on the dreamy list, but we actually already have a cow on our island, so we did pass her up. Next, we are on the hamsters. We saw Marlo twice. Love him. We saw Clay twice. And then we saw Rodney 1 time. Now we have the dreaded lions. We saw Rory 4 times. Twice in a row, might I add. Now we have Rex. We saw him twice. And then we have Leopold. And then we saw Elvis. Next, we are on to the goats. We saw Sherb twice. Very cute. And then we saw Gruff. And then moving on to the next goat, we saw Nan. which very tempting. She's adorable. And then we are on the koalas. We have Leeman, my favorite. And then we have Alice. Next, we have Ozzy. Very cute. Also very tempting because he's like very neutral. Same with Gonzo. And then we have Eugene. Cool guy, huh? Moving on, we have Yuka twice. And then our last koala we have is Faith. And then we have a couple alligators. We have Sly. And then we saw Alfonso. Next we saw is Gail. And she's pretty cute, honestly. And then we have Roswell. And then we move on to Elk, I think. We saw Shino 3 times. And then we saw Lopez 1 time. And then we saw Fuchsia. There's some deer in the mix, sorry. And then we have Bruce. And then Bam. I just categorize them all together because they have like antlers or they're deer or something. And then we have Zell. And moving on to the mice, we have Chatter. And then we saw Greta. And that is the last of the mice. We only saw 2. And then we have a couple hippos. We have Biddy. And then our next hippo is Bertha. And then moving on to the gorillas, we saw Caesar. And then we saw Louie. And then we saw Rocket twice. Terrible, right? And then we saw Violet. Next we have is Al. And then we have some kangaroos. We saw Carrie 3 times. And then we saw Walt. And then we saw Kit twice. Next we have is Astrid. And then we have Matilda. And that was the last of the kangaroos. Moving on to the dogs, we have Butch, which he's pretty cute, not gonna lie. I do love the dogs. Anyways, we have Mac. And then we have Cherry, which is crazy because she just moved off our island. And at this point, I was like, dang, should we take her back? Just kidding. Then we have is Fret. And then we have some chickens. We got Goose, which is pretty cute and would go with Farmcore. But I did pass him up because he was early on in the hunt. We have Benedict. And then we have this cute chicken, Ava. And then our last one is Knox. Now we have some horses. We have Ed. And then we saw Risco twice. And then we saw Buck twice. And his eyebrows looked very angry. We saw Claude. And then we saw Peaches. We have a couple ducks. We saw Mallory. And she's very cute. And then we saw Joey, who is also adorable. If I didn't already have a duck, he would have came home with us. We have Gloria. And then moving on to the cats, we saw Cat. We did pass up Cat, even though they are on our list, only because I got them like the second ticket in. So we got Bob, who I love Bob. I have a little soft spot for cats, honestly. And then we saw Monique twice. Stunning, of course. And then we saw Tabby. We saw a lot of cats, which was surprising. Next we saw is Stinky. And then after Stinky, we saw is Rosie, who is absolutely adorable. Missed opportunity. And then we saw Punchy, who is also very cute. And last but not least, we saw Tangy. And we did end up taking Tangy home with us, even though Tangy's not on our list. I have a soft spot for cats, like I said, and I've never had Tangy on an island, so, you know, they're coming home with us. It might be temporary, but I do have some cute little yard plans for them. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you could leave a like, comment, subscribe, and tell me your favorite villager in the comments below. Alright, bye guys. I'll see you in the next one.